No?
No.
Now, yes. At proper radio stations, that's better. You have a red light that goes on and everything, right? And
Yeah, but proper radio stations wouldn't hire you as their MC.
that's right. So to get the hang of it, I'm exercising this here in the Daily Tck. Welcome and good morning. Daily Tck meeting today, last day of the Bonn Intersessional, last Intersessional before Paris, or is it? Oh.
Spoiler alert!
Rumor has it that some negotiators are so excited about the fun and games that we are seeing here that we might have another one.
Well, I thought we made so much progress this week that there's no need for another one. Is that still the case?
Yeah, but you know, the more time you have, the more progress you can make. And who knows, maybe we are decarbonized worldwide before Paris if we, just put in some more time. Anyway, serious business, my friends. It's been an interesting and rich NGO meeting this morning. I have two guests here who will help me figure out what we're dealing with here today. And as we look forward to Paris and the many intersessionals between now and Paris, with us, the wonderful and amazing Hunter Cutting from Climate Nexus and the wonderful Luisa Casson from ECG. Okay. Maybe I'll start with a question for Luisa. We'll do a little sort of Q&A, and then obviously you ask your questions later, and welcome to the latecomers. Maybe just a sort of general take on how it's been going since yesterday morning. Luisa, what's your sense of the negotiations? Maybe not the details, like this bit of the text, that bit of the text, but the general vibe we have, and in terms of like start progress, sort of where are we?
I think it's at that kind of stop-start moment. So there was the stock take last night, and then everyone thought there was, maybe some moments of some drama and some fights, and some delegates saying, "But I've come all the way. There's not enough progress," and then going to go back into the stock take. So it's kind of edging forward, but we're not quite sure what's going to emerge this morning, and still sort of quite uncertain about how far we've actually come, because it's been quite difficult all week to actually understand what's happening in those closed doors.
Yeah, all right. I think we got the sense from people who were sort of trying to track things that in a few issues, sort of it's moving okay, sort of, where unusual groupings of parties are coming together to craft these bridging proposals, where you have the odd, strange bedfellows like Marshall Islands and Saudi Arabia together with others crafting a bridging proposal. That's obviously nice, right? This kind of thing. But at the same time, we heard about conversations that were stuck for one reason or another. Maybe a question for Hunter, sort of before we look at some of these things in detail, on balance, like what are the big things that really get most of attention? Where is the energy at the moment, or the biggest problem at the moment? I guess finance. I hear finance a lot. What else if not just finance?
I think finance is a sticking point, and loss and damage is obviously a sticking point. But I think it's a sticking point here at the negotiator level. And I kind of feel like this negotiator level negotiations basically have run out of oxygen. They've run their course. There's nothing more to be done here. Like, let's go home, because really basically it's time for ministers and heads of state. And they can give this process more oxygen. This process can't go forward any further until they get new instructions and new political signals, however you want to call it, from the head of state. And that finance is a great example, right? The head of the negotiating team is almost civil servant level kind of person, and they're not going to make decisions on finance. It's great that there's an opportunity for heads of state and ministers to gather D20, to gather at this thing called the pre-COP. That's a sort of an informal meeting before the big meeting in Paris. And then, of course, there's the heads of state meeting on the first day of Paris. So there's opportunities for them to have those conversations that have to be had.
Yeah, sounds good. Maybe to give you a bit of detail, interesting discussion this morning on the loss and damage issue, for example. Actually varying views from people in the room at the NGO meeting on what that is and where it's at. It seems like there's a polarized set of options now in the paper, and a couple of colleagues were sort of worried about this and thought that we are set up for an all or nothing situation where loss and damage somehow would either be included in the outcome strongly or could get lost completely. But others sort of rejected this way of reading the situation and said it is so sort of strongly anchored politically already that it would be very, very, very hard to imagine an outcome without loss and damage. So we should sort of argue and communicate from a position of strength that loss and damage is definitely in. The question is maybe how is it in, how strong or weak. On this discussion of finance, like maybe Luisa, can you give us a bit more detail on the different angles or takes on finance that the umbrella countries or the developing countries are coming from? Then I think there's something about pre and post 2020. Can you dissect that a little bit?
Sure. I mean, I think mainly it's sort of the pre-2020 has been such a big focus because obviously it's the most urgent. And there is this sort of promise and this pledge to fulfill this 100 billion yearly by 2020. So that's kind of, you've got a clear number, and that's where a lot of the kind of intense political discussions have happened both inside the negotiations and in the real world. And you've had sort of ministers in different countries being involved throughout the year. Obviously, we had the meetings in Lima and the UN Secretary, the launch of the SDGs just a few weeks ago, and that's where you saw more pledges coming forward. But there are still difficulties on how do we count this money, what is an acceptable way to actually track that. So that's sort of, I think, taken up a lot of the political attention. And so we've actually got quite a big hole on post-2020 finance, which is really key in thinking about Paris, because Paris will come into effect in 2020, and so we need to think about how we get those predictable cycles, how we know that we're having that conversation continuing, because that, we need to know how much finance we can have to unlock more mitigation action, but also to know, how prepared we can be for impacts. So it really feels like those conversations on post-2020 finance are not rich enough yet, even though the clear demands are emerging. We've got, this idea of 100 billion as a floor. We see increasing finance, this idea about cycles and coming back regularly every 5 years to talk about finance and get a sort of update on how things are going and responding to the changing world, and then having a greater share of finance going towards adaptation as we know that climate impacts are starting to bite. But I feel like even though these demands are sort of getting talked about within civil society, they aren't quite translating into the text at the moment, and there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And this is really where we need sort of heads of state and ministers to get involved. And it's not just about sort of big number pledges, it's about thinking how do we shift those trillions into sort of aligning finance with dealing with climate change and managing it in a way that looks after citizens.
Good, great. I think that gives you a comprehensive picture. A Chinese colleague in the meeting just now made the great effort to try and sort of squeeze his take on the Bonn outcome and looking forward into 4 words. And the 4 words he offered were restore balance, enhance ambition. Nice one, I thought, from Yishuo from Greenpeace. I think what Luisa just talked about addresses the restore balance a lot. Support for developing countries, including the loss and damage thing, something strong on that ideally. What about the enhanced ambition? Hunter, maybe you can talk a little bit about this. The NGOs were keen on pushing especially the loss and damage and finance stuff, but I guess we won't let long-term goal, ratchet mechanism, and other things completely unnoticed here at the end of Bonn. So quick take maybe on where it's at the end of Bonn and what could happen there between now and Paris.
Yeah, I actually, if I could just back up a sec, I mean, ambition is one of these great terms of art, right? So, and different people mean different things when they say ambition, and that's actually something that I just continually learn on. So I think, some people when they say ambition, they mean ambition on finance and mitigation, right? And both pieces of the finance of adaptation and the finance for mitigation. And other people, when they mean ambition, they mean more deeper pollution cuts by developed countries. So it's a smorgasbordy in there. But just zooming in just on the question on the mitigation, which I thought you were looking at. So it seems like on a very technical level, there was actually some progress here in Lima. one of the big questions is, what are the rules for, measuring, reporting, verifying, accounting for pollution cuts? It's the code word there is transparency. And it seems like, there's a good range of options that have been identified, so ministers can have really productive conversations around that. I think, it's an interesting, it's just from a political point of view, I think it's interesting. In the past, we might have even seen those discussions held up due to the lack of finance, and we haven't actually. So that's actually, really goodwill, I'd say, on the part of developing countries that they've let those conversations go forward, even though you could say, there's no money, honey, to do the mitigation in developing countries, yet they're letting the conversation go forward for how to do the mitigation, even though there's no money for it. So yeah. I think that's a positive sign. I think, one of the, at the very biggest picture, one of the huge differences between now and Copenhagen, everyone's got their list of what's different between now and Copenhagen. But I think the biggest difference, the most important difference is there is a huge number of countries that want a deal in Paris. And that just wasn't the case in Copenhagen. And so if you ask me, why do I think we can get a deal that's, worth having? It's because of that. And the countries, and there are a handful of countries, and no, I don't want to say who they are, who don't want a deal, but they're a very small handful. And at the end of the day, I don't think they're willing to stand out and block a deal. Because we've got the heavies, China and the United States, they're on board in a way they weren't in Copenhagen. And so I think the whole dynamic is different. And I think the progress here at the technical level on mitigation sort of in part reflects that.
Yeah. Thanks. I think one more round of questions. I'd like to end on communications with Hunter, but first we go to Louisa one more time, and then obviously we can also open it up to your questions later, as long as you guys have time. We had various elements of the next few weeks and months covered already in terms of higher levels, ministers, heads of states, etc. But let's drill down on the detail here. Okay, sometime today this will finish, probably. There'll be some kind of text, right? It sounds like on workstream 2, it's pretty ballooned and bracketed. On workstream 1, it seems like mixed, sort of, better in some places, not so good in others. Work remains, right? Seems like not really yet in the shape that you would just put in the bag now, take to Paris, and then get out of the bag in Paris and continue. Work needs to happen between now and then. What does that work look like at the negotiator level and at the sort of higher political level? Can you explain?
Yeah, so I think, one of the positive things is that we haven't had kind of a huge fight where the text has been completely discredited. And so we don't have, a text that is so unmanageable as we did, at the end of the summer. But I think you're right that we do need to do a lot of work up to Paris so that we don't just arrive there and realize that, we've got loads and loads to do and we wasted our time. So I think, at the negotiator level, what they really need to work on, having seen where there may be sort of some elements of convergence, but really knowing the detail about the specific words that cause flare-ups and disagreements, really work on some bridging options that can kind of try and bridge those differences and take that back to their national capital and talk this through with ministers, because it's up to ministers and heads of state to make the decisions on how far they can go. And there are some issues that actually negotiators currently don't have a strong mandate on. So within Europe there isn't a strong position on when we would have that raise action after Paris. We'd like to see it in 2018 so that we can raise those pledges, but some of these things just haven't been discussed. So that's really important that you have negotiators taking this knowledge of the really techie details and transferring that to ministers and heads of state, who can then discuss what's happening. But I think there's another really important level, which is civil society pressure. There's incredible preparation going on for sort of the biggest climate march happening just before Paris, and that seeing that in lots of major cities around the world, as well as smaller solidarity actions. So I think that will be really key. I think really exciting is this kind of unified push for 100% clean. Because long-term goal is so important. If we're going to say Paris isn't just a one-off deal, it has to set the path to where we need to be. We need to get off. I think all of the actions that we will start to see increasing in pace, and really creative, exciting actions happening in so many different communities and cities around the world, that can also have a really strong in the mood for Paris, and really emphasizing that urgency of what kind of thing we need to see there.
Brilliant, thank you. I have a last question for Hunter, and then I'm sure you have questions. There's a lot here, right? Like, this is almost a bit overwhelming, all these elements, all these issues, the dynamics, various levels, negotiators compared to high levels, ministers, heads of states, etc. I mean, my head was spinning when I came out of the BCG meeting, and I don't envy the communications and media colleagues in the NGOs and in Cannes who now need to write this down in 3 or 4 talking points that sort of give us a line to communicate to the outside world. But I think that's what we sort of eventually have to sort of dumb it down to, boil it down to, something pretty simple that we want to convey coming out of here and looking forward. Recapping or sort of revisiting how we came into this week and how we went through this week, I think my sense, don't know where you are at, was that we came in with a lot of momentum, with a lot of wind in our sails from the real world, right? Changes, ambition, statements. There was a lot of good stuff happening. We had a text that was sort of promising, you know, it was work, but challenging, you know, that it would make people upset and angry, which is why then we had this panic moment, obviously, Sunday late, Monday early, when everybody was like, ooh, they're opening it up again, you know, this is risky, it could derail the whole thing, but maybe it has to happen, let's see how it goes. Then the big collective relief Tuesday morning, and I think always reflected in media coverage, not just here in the community, it seemed like, okay, they're quite disciplined, and adding specs. So Tuesday, everybody were very good after the short panic moment, right? And I think since then, Wednesday, Thursday, the last couple of days, we've had a sort of more normal Bonn scenario with a mixed bag of good and bad, and media sort of zooming in on specific issues, especially the finance story yesterday, I think, and this morning. Never lose confidence, I think, throughout coverage, you know, even in the panic moment, there were these confident voices from civil society, from parties, from French presidency, who would keep saying, it's not easy, a lot of work, but we'll get there, it looks like we can do this, etc. I think sort of that's how I would summarize how the story has gone in the last few days and weeks. Maybe now, with all this, to Hunter, in terms of coming out of here and telling people something about from here to Paris. What's our story? What is a good, short summary story that we should give to the outside world? Tough question.
Yeah, I'm still bringing out for myself. I mean, I guess for me, we got what we needed out of Bonn, right? At the end of the day, we got what we needed out of Bonn. You might say that we got it, you know, Tuesday morning, actually. But because what we need is we need to have the ministers and the heads of state make some decisions. And they got, you know, they're not being handed like in Copenhagen, you know, 200 pages of text and being asked to make a decision. I mean, you know, there's lots of, this is not for the big, broad public messaging, but I think there's lots of, you know, hallway conversations about, well, you know, we're going to need to have the negotiating teams work with text, with the minute, you know, look at where there's a will, there's a way, you know, at a very, you know, the ministers and the heads of states do have what they need to move the conversation forward. And all the drama here in Bonn ultimately is a tempest in a teacup. You know, you're not, you know, it's not reflected in the White House and, you know, and all the other, you know, capitals around the world. I just say the White House because I'm from the United States. You know, I'm very hopeful. I mean, nothing about the basic political dynamic has changed, which is that, you know, the vast majority of the world's countries want a deal. You know, we have, you know, the INDCs, which are a big chunk of the deal, you know, already on the table. Clearly, we have to have the other pieces of the deal, a big piece of which is finance. They've got to answer they have to have a credible thing on finance, you know. And just like the INDCs did not solve all of the, did not clarify how we're going to cut pollution all the way down to zero by 2050 or whatever, the finance solution that we got out of Paris isn't going to clearly lay out the pathway all the way through either. But it looks to me like there's a really good opportunity that it could, you know, put the architecture together, the framework, whatever word you want to use for establishing that. So I'm very hopeful that the pieces are all there politically for us to get a deal that's credible. That's actually a good step forward. That's how I feel about it.
Yeah. So sort of momentum story, a continued momentum story at the sort of macro level, and then I guess one could drill into specific issues at a micro level and discuss what still needs to happen at which political level between now and Paris in order to shape the missing bits or the things that are not quite finished yet, so that we come out not just with a deal that seems to be definitely in the cards, but with a deal as good as possible.
It's incredible. That's
Yeah.
worth having.
Worth having and worth building on and taking forward into the coming decades, right? Great. I mean, my questions, which were, select the discussions we heard this morning, and I'm sure some other people here have questions for Louisa and Hunter. So let's open the floor. Yeah, Alden?
Specifically on finance, but also generally, do you think that election concerns going on to the post-2020 finance period, do you think those are playing into what negotiators and heads of state are going to be willing to commit at this point?
So the question there for everyone online was around finance and post-2020, linking in some of the elections we've seen, obviously recently and maybe early next year. This week, we've already had Canada. We've got Poland and Argentina coming up. There's a lot of elections that have happened. It's 19 elections this year, I think.
Wow.
And we're obviously going to have elections early next year. Do you think that these elections are going to play into this kind of post-2020 finance piece, or is that maybe too early to tell?
I mean, I think with finance, it is always difficult for governments to kind of bind future governments into doing something, particularly when it's about sort of financial pledges. You know, we're not very good at predicting what's going to happen to the global economy. I think as young people, we all know that. So, that is difficult. But I think what Hunter was saying about, Paris isn't going to give us all the answers straight away because we're trying to do something really difficult and we don't quite know how we're going to do it. But what Paris can do is it can get us in the right way of thinking of how we get those answers. So, we don't know exactly what the world is going to be like in 2030, 2040. But if we have the Paris Agreement as a sort of guide of these are the steps that we'll need to go through, and this is how we're all going to do this together, then it stops that, certain countries feeling very exposed and therefore sort of lowballing offers or being more reluctant to put forward offers on mitigation or on finance. So I think it's really that sense of building the confidence that we're all in this together, we're all going to take responsibility, and we're going to work out how to take the sort of appropriate level of responsibility for the future, because we can't ignore this problem. It's not like there is a business as usual without climate change. We can't ignore having to deal with it.
I think I saw Vanessa as well. Yeah.
Yeah. During the negotiations, the percentage of 50% was also discussed. Could you please give more?
So the question that was just asked was from Vanessa Bolivar, one of the Adopt a Negotiator trackers this week, and it was about the 50-50 balance of finance. There was a call at the start of the week from developing countries to balance finance 50% on adaptation and 50% on mitigation. This is obviously a view that may not be shared by everyone in the negotiating rooms. How do you see that playing out this week and into Paris?
I think it is about finding the sort of way to capture that in the text that is appropriate and acceptable to as many countries as possible. I think, how I see the 100 billion is actually this is something we really need to learn from what went wrong and why, finance has become such a polarized issue. We can see that although there are, some countries individually have a promise that they want to try and balance 50-50 funding for mitigation and for adaptation, that in practice that's not what we're seeing. The reports that have come out tracking the 100 billion have shown that there is such a bias towards mitigation. But increasingly, as we know that we are going to have to adapt to some pretty significant changes in our climate, that call for adaptation funding, I think, will become stronger and stronger. And I think countries are still cagey about how we fit that in the text.
But why is 50-50 not just a straightforward, easy, yep, 50-50 sounds good, I know what that means. Why can't we just throw that in?
I think it's because some of the asks aren't clear as well. I think this is the thing, the 100 billion has been such the focus that, those demands aren't even coming that clearly. So we kind of, I think it'd be really helpful to have that kind of unity around let's have 50-50, because there are still some fears from sort of the traditional donors that means they'll be locked into a certain number, even if sort of privately they are saying, actually, we accept there's a need for a balance, but we don't know whether we'd put 50-50. We don't know whether we'd say a balance. This is when, you get these techie discussions about what word is best, and negotiators are bringing their personal prejudices in about what words they like. And this is where we need ministers to realize this is a key demand and give negotiators the mandate to find a solution, because I think that is going to be such a key point for the post-2020 finance discussions.
And are there any more questions for just this morning? All right, well, we're going to, I guess, kind of hold it there for questions. If you have any questions online that you want to ask throughout the day, you can tweet them at #call4climate, #CALL, the number 4, because we're cool, climate afterwards, that after the number 4, which potentially can represent the word FOR, which is great. So your last thoughts, we're about to transition into Paris. At the start of the week, if you had to rate yourself on a number of out of 10 of how optimistic you were, what number would it have been on Monday?
Oh, I don't know whether I'd even have been able to give one. I was quite nervous about what we were going to see. So it was a kind of very tentative, maybe 5.
Maybe a 5?
Yeah,
Okay.
just not sure, because it was kind of, is the text legitimate? Is there going to be a big fight? Is there not? It felt like there were quite a lot of rumblings. It's quite difficult to tell.
And right now, where are you sitting?
In terms of getting a positive outcome in Paris?
Out of 10, where are you sitting that we're now kind of moving towards something positive?
I think above 5.
Above 5.
I'm being very hesitant. But
There
I
has
think,
been
you know,
a positive shift.
I
You
think-
just
yeah, we're still unclear how good a deal is and how much progress it's going to be. But I think we have a clear idea of, well, at least from civil society side, of what discussions need to happen and the urgency around it. So, you know, I think it's on all of us to take those messages home and to keep pressing as much as we can.
All right, well, there you have it. Above 5. Hunter, I might ask you the same question. We had a
Yes.
question before. On Monday morning, if you had to rate out of 10 how optimistic you were about how these talks would lead into a positive Paris deal, what number would you have picked?
A positive Paris deal? Odds? I'm like,
But on Monday morning, what were you feeling
oh,
out of 10?
Monday? I was, so we're talking, we've seen trying to run my brain back to
It's
Monday
been 5
morning.
long
Yeah.
days, trust me. It's
When
been,
was Monday?
Yeah. So Monday morning. Monday morning.
that was the milk cafe, I think. You
Well,
started with a
that we had
cappuccino that
all
morning.
there's a lot of drama on Sunday, and so Monday was like a bit of a bummer. I guess what I was feeling was probably like a 6, but I don't think that's what my brain would have said. I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in the drama here and just miss the forest for the trees. And so my brain probably still would have said, you know, an 8, although I was feeling like a 6.
And right now, what number are you throwing out there?
I'm still at an 8. I just still feel that politically, you know, the pieces are all there. And when I say positive, I mean, my bar is really low. Right? A deal worth having. That's all I care about. Like, is this worth having? Does this, you know, or do we reject? Or are we smarter in rejecting the deal? And I don't think we're going to get a deal that we should reject. I think we're going to get a deal that we should embrace and leverage to push for the next things that we want. I mean, you know, the fight never ends. And if I could just play my gray hair moment for a second.
I think you're starting.
Never gonna end. That's just that you don't get to the promised land. Your life's work is about traveling to the promised land, and it's a journey. And so I you know, and that's what it's going to be with these negotiations as well, right? It's, you know, and I do think that Paris is really going to be a helpful way for us to move down the road. That you know, now could things go kerblooey, and yeah, absolutely that could happen. But I think that's more likely to be sort of an accident, a really unfortunate accident of history, rather than the political forces, you know, converged. It's going to be more like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, which can happen. But right now, I think we're set up to actually capture victory.
So are your heart and your brain coming more aligned at the moment? Are you saying you're 8 on both of those angles, or?
Well, yeah, I think I'm one of those people that unfortunately lives too much in my head. So if I talk and think enough, I can get my heart and my head aligned.
All right. Well, I hope that doesn't say a lot for your love life.
Oh!
So moving on from this. No, there you have it. So both of our guests this morning, given the drama that we've had so far, feeling pretty positive about the way that we're going ahead towards Paris. Obviously, as Hunter just noted, Paris is not the promised land. It may be the Nile. We may need to kind of overcome the Nile before we then head towards the promised land. And as we know in the Nile story, that led to a few more years of wandering. So we may be wandering for a fair while after Paris, but it may be a big, important juncture to help us on the direction that we need to go. And we certainly haven't seen any diversion from that journey this week, or so it seems. We've still got 12 hours left. What time do you think we'll finish today?
I mean, I'm leaving at lunchtime, so.
And Hunter?
Well, you want a quick report back from the stock take?
Why not?
So it was a very low drama stock take.
There we
You
go.
know, they actually, I mean, people kvetched, but it was super short, right? They went right back to work in the spinoff groups. And we're going to get a new text apparently at around 2 o'clock, and they're going to convene at 3 o'clock to talk about it. So clearly, there was agreement to keep working all this morning, and there was no objection to that. And so,
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Cooler heads right now.
The journey continues. The
Yes.
work continues. The geeky analysis of text. We get another chance at 2 o'clock, which, according to my watch, is in about 3 hours. So everyone, make sure there's coffees well and truly at the brim in about 3 hours time, and get ready for what's going to be an action-packed day. If you're listening on live, you can join the conversation throughout the day on Twitter at #ADP2 or #CallForClimate. You can obviously check out the Adopt a Negotiator blog, Climate Nexus, which Hunter is writing for and has a great team there. And will there be anything coming out of Third Generation?
Yeah, check e3g.org for a flurry of blogs.
A flurry of blogs, a McFlurry of blogs maybe. So thanks a lot for joining us. It's been an awesome week, and I've really enjoyed connecting with you all in this room and online. I hope you have an awesome weekend, and I hope you celebrate this new text in about 3 hours time, which, as we say, is going to lead us to the promised land, is it not?
On the way.
On the way.
A way station.
But all going in the same direction.
We're headed, direction of travel.
I think I will now take that quote about the Nile and the promised land and sell it to one of the speakers on the Can Press panel, and that'll be good for 5 coffees at least. Very good one, I think.
Building.
And we'll do this again in Paris, right? And at any intercessionals that are still being put on between now and then, the 3 or 5 intercessionals that are still to come. And see you in Paris. Watch the email list, and we'll tell you where to be at 10:15 during the COP21.
Woo!
Thanks a lot, everyone. See you in Paris.
Bye.